Tonight, for SMA Awareness Month, we are very, very honoured to have Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. She is an Olympian who has been to probably more Olympics than most other British Olympians. She's a crossbench peer in the House of Lords, a motivational speaker, broadcaster, and most importantly, a mum, which is probably the hardest job of the lot. She is talking to us tonight about her life, about discrimination and disability, and about advocacy. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. And sorry me scrabbling around. I just realised that with the light going down in my room in my house where I am, it's going to start getting dark. So at some point, I will switch on the light behind me so I don't disappear into the ether. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk tonight, and it's a huge pleasure to have this opportunity. And I was going to talk a little bit about life as a disabled woman, life as an athlete, life as a parliamentarian, and I guess some of the challenges that I see coming up along the way. So I was born with spina bifida, and my parents were told when I was born that if I'd been born 2 years earlier, I'd have been taken away and not fed. And I think that kind of set quite an important tone in our house in terms of, you know, my parents just sort of getting on with things, to be honest. And when I was born, I was in an incubator for about a day and a half, but I didn't really have any outward signs of spina bifida. I had a little sort of egg-shaped lump on my back, and that was it. But it was only really I started to exhibit issues when I started crawling, when I've got an older sister. And I guess because my mum had a comparison, that she was able to see that I wasn't able to crawl the same way that my sister had. And I walked a little bit when I was young, but I really struggled. My legs were very weak. They never properly developed. And then we don't have some of the diagnostics that we have now in lots of ways. So yeah, I kind of had x-rays and things like that, but they didn't really know the extent to which the spina bifida was going to affect me. And then it was kind of later on that they realised that I'm missing some of the bones in my vertebra, that they're just not properly formed. So what happened is when I started to grow, I also developed scoliosis and my spine started collapsing. So it was actually my own vertebra that severed my spinal cord that paralysed me. And I don't remember much about it. There wasn't any pain. You know, I didn't miss a day of school. It just very gradually I stopped being able to do things. So my parents were amazing because there were a lot of people back then talking about walking was the most important thing, that I had to be on my feet. And I did have calipers and crutches, but I couldn't really do much with them. So I could stand, but I couldn't play with my friends, and I couldn't get to school on my own and couldn't do any of that. So it was my parents that sort of said, actually, I think she needs a wheelchair. And there were people around who, you know, I mean, I'm 51, it's a very different time. There were no dropped curbs, there were no accessible toilets, education was segregated. So being a wheelchair user was seen by some as a bit of a failure, that it was actually just going to make life really difficult for me. But my parents sort of were of a very strongly held view that I needed to live an independent life, and I needed to be able to push myself around. I needed to be strong enough to do that. So I needed to be fit and, you know, healthy and active. So that's really where sort of the physical activity started for me from quite a young age. And for me, and I know everyone's experience of becoming a wheelchair user is very different, but for me, having my first chair was amazing, because I could then do the things that I wanted to do. You know, I could play with my friends and run away from my sister, and I felt for the first time that I had freedom to do things. And so for me, it was a really positive experience. It didn't, you know, it came with challenges in terms of no drop curbs and accessible toilets. And it's bizarre, you know, even though things are so much better than they used to be, I still plan trips out around, will there be an accessible toilet? How much can I drink? How much, you know, because it's still not guaranteed that those things will be in place. So some of the things that I work on now about accessible train travel, toilets, things like that, are really important, because, you know, I feel really strongly that disabled people should have the opportunity to do whatever they want. And some of those opportunities are better. I think some of those opportunities are more challenging as well. And the attitude towards disability has evolved, but I'm not always sure how much it's moved on. So there is much more understanding of invisible impairments, but then there's also a lot of prejudice around visible and invisible impairments. To be honest, I've lost track of the number of people over the years who've said to me, have you tried to walk? I go, do you know what? No, hang on a minute, let's give it a go. And I don't think people always intend to be mean when they say that. I'm not always sure what they mean, to be perfectly honest, but as if you wouldn't have tried. And so there's some really interesting attitudes around the moment about deserving and undeserving disabled people. That comes from, previous decades of deserving and undeserving poor, and the sort of the strivers and, people who try. So there's some really interesting attitudes at the moment, which are quite complicated and quite difficult to deal with, I think, on a day-to-day basis. So where I was really lucky, actually going back to when I was a child, was that my head teacher was meant to tell a local education authority that I was a wheelchair user, and he didn't. He was too busy. For the kind of 4 years I was a wheelchair user in school. And then, although my parents sort of recognised lots of the discrimination, they sort of protected me from a lot of it, because I remember parents dragging their children out of my way in supermarkets and saying things like, don't get too close to her, you might catch it. And my parents just sort of helping me understand, that's their problem, not mine. And actually there's nothing I could do about my impairment, so just sort of kind of get on with it, really. So a lot of those sort of things didn't really affect me. I think they toughened me up as well. And I think it's very different, people deal with that in a very different way. But I think at the time, my parents gave me lots of skills to help deal with that. So when it came to going to high school, I had no right to go to a mainstream school. And the education authority tried to push me through the special school system, which at the time wasn't the right place for me to be. You didn't leave with any useful exams, to be honest. And so my parents knew that Baroness Warnock, Mary Warnock, had written a green paper on education, and they got hold of a copy of it and then threatened to sue the Secretary of State for Wales over my right to go to a mainstream school. And I was very lucky that through the letters and the campaigning that I got to mainstream school. And my father passed away about 10 years ago, and we found all his letters, quite rude, some of them. But, I kind of knew at that point, my parents talked me through what they were doing, and they, I had to read the white and green papers, and I had to try and understand the education legislation. I was 10, it's like, I haven't got a clue, really. I remember my father saying to me, this is really important, not just for you, but this will be a really important part of your life. And, at 10, you don't appreciate that. 30 years later, I am sitting, having been through my career as an athlete and got into politics and got into Parliament. I am sitting in a debate tabled by Baroness Warnock, which is celebrating 30 years since her work on education. And I get to sit in the House of Lords chamber and say, because of you, I'm here. Because of the work you did, my parents used your work to get me, and this is where I am. To be fair, she looked at me and she went, so we didn't really have a bonding moment, but there we go. There's so much luck in terms of that. And I think what it taught me from quite a young age is that if you have a disabled child, you have to learn, you have to be an expert in so many different bits of the system and try and join it up. And one of the issues is, physical activity is not always seen as the biggest priority if you're fighting for education, personal independence payment, all the different support things that you need around you. So it's not easy in terms of understanding all the legislation and fighting your way through. But one of the things my parents brought me up to believe was that, I kind of knew from a young age that I was very lucky with my parents, that my father was a huge believer in you kind of give stuff back. And he used to tell me all the time, as like most kids don't have what you have, and I'd be like, yeah, I know, like, okay, Dad, whatever. But he kind of told me from being quite a young age. So politics was not party politics, because we didn't talk about party politics. I have no idea how my parents ever voted. We never talked party politics, but we talked about politics of change and how to affect change and how to pull different levers. And again, this was from quite young that we talked about some of these things. So, my dad was always like, okay, when you've finished and messed about with your sporting career, you need to do something that will help other people. So that was kind of a part of it. So I started doing sport in school. I went to a comprehensive in South Wales at the time. There was only one comprehensive in South Wales that took disabled children, and I was lucky enough to get there. When you talk to young people now about there being one school in a whole county, but that's the reality of it. And I'm lucky again, born at the right time. I got in and did O-levels, A-levels. I do remember when I was doing A-levels having a row with a specialist careers advisor, because he told me I shouldn't be doing A-levels and needed to lower my sights, that I shouldn't go to university because it wasn't for me, and that he could get me onto a secretarial course and I could learn how to answer phones. And apparently my response was, well, don't you just pick it up and say hello? I got told off for that. I went home and told my parents, and my dad was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't have said it in that way, but yeah, whatever, And I remember just being kind of annoyed at that, because for me, it's about your potential. Whatever your potential is, it's getting to your potential. And, he just discounted me because I was a wheelchair user. Anyway, bizarrely, my first job on graduating was a job answering phones, which I never went back and told him about that. But it kind of fit in with my sporting career, and it was great because you got to know all the gossip in the office. But for me, it's not looking at the wheelchair. I mean, the wheelchair is one of the first things you see about me, but it's not the only thing about me. And it's quite interesting. I was on Pointless recently, which a lot of people going, yeah, you're pointless. You get that shouted in the street. I was on one of the picture rounds, and I wasn't shown in my wheelchair. And it's amazing the number of people who actually were on the programme who knew me that didn't recognise it was me because you couldn't see the wheelchair as well. So it's intrinsically part of what I do, but it's not everything that I do. So anyway, I kind of got into sport, played loads of different sports. Wheelchair racing was the thing I loved more than anything else, and would love to tell you I was brilliant at it, but I was pretty rubbish for the first 5 years I competed. I took a long time to get good. But what I did find from a young age was found a training group and a coach and people around me who supported me to be the best I could be, to look at my potential. And, I made the GB team at 17. I did my first Paralympics at 19. And being in Seoul in Korea was amazing. As a 19-year-old from South Wales who'd now travelled to Europe, I'd never travelled anywhere else, and seeing this completely different culture and different way disabled people were treated. And, they pretty much developed a Paralympic team in a really short space of time. And their Paralympic team were given a pension if they won a medal. And then we really didn't see many of those athletes ever again. It took a long time for South Korea to develop a bigger base of athletes. It was that kind of one moment because they wanted as a country to do well at the 88 Paralympics, but they hadn't thought about the long term. And for me as a 19-year-old, seeing the way disabled people were treated was, interesting, fascinating, challenging, because a lot of disabled people were living on the streets and begging. That was their only way of making money. But coming back from Seoul, I kind of knew that sport was what I wanted to do. So, I joke, but all the decisions I made around that, after that, were based around me graduating and trying to develop a career in wheelchair racing. And, Paralympic sport has developed lots. I think people make the assumption that I made a shed load of money in sport. I mean, there really wasn't much. I won quite a lot of, well, not even a lot, gift vouchers. Great, but it doesn't put petrol in your car. So worked on and off through my sporting career, because the other thing my dad was always keen on is like, yeah, you can do sport now, but you've got to do something when you retire. So it was about building a skill base and learning to do other things so that when I retired, I'd have other skills to call on. And so Athens was my last Paralympics. And, I knew in Athens that I was done. I really did. I was 35, I think, 35. And I was sort of mentally and physically broken, really. But I didn't stop then, because I wanted to make sure that there was nothing left. I knew I couldn't do Beijing. I knew I couldn't last another 4 years. So I did another two years, but was sick and injured pretty much for the whole of that 2 years. Struggled to tiny performances together, you know, back to back, which, you know, you kind of need to do as an athlete. And it was pretty tough, but I'm now glad that I did those 2 years, to know when I retired that I was done. I was absolutely done. There was no regrets about stopping. But amongst all that, I got involved in the bid for the 2012 games, and people forget we'd bid with Birmingham, we'd bid with Manchester. Manchester went against Sydney for the 2000 games, you know, and, you know, the Sydney bid, they just showed a picture of Bondi Beach, you know, and it was like, and, you know, at the time it was difficult not winning, but actually it was really good we didn't, because we didn't have lottery funding, hadn't kicked in, and the support for athletes and the coverage of the Paralympics was still growing. So we needed that extra 12 years to get to a point where as a country we could do really well. And I think, you know, the IOC were always very clear that it had to be a London bid. But what a lot of people don't know is that it was only after the 2012 games that any city who bid for the Olympics had to have the Paralympics. Up until that point, it was always a negotiation. So, you know, whether it was Atlanta, you know, Sydney, Athens, that you were bidding to the IOC for the Olympics, and then the Paralympic negotiation happened afterwards. And for our bid for London, that was the same. But what London did was it put in a bid for both games. And I really thought, and you know, the closest I got to competing on home soil at a major games was Commonwealth Games in 2002. I knew it wouldn't happen in my career. And I knew that if we wanted a Paralympics on home soil, we had to win the Olympics. So I talked a lot about the Olympics, not much about the Paralympics. But what was amazing, either through Barbara Kasani, who was the first woman who, she led the bid originally, and then Seb Coe came in, was I never once, I thought my job was going to be for the whole of it to go, and what about the Paralympics? And I never once had to do that, because the people involved got the Paralympics, and they talked about the games or the two games. You know, there's lots of rules around how we can talk about the games. But that was an amazing experience to be involved in, not just the bid, but then games delivery, and then the games that happened in 2012, which were really amazing. They were fab. I mean, they were just the best moments of my life as an athlete. They were some of the best moments, even though I wasn't competing. You know, going into the stadium and seeing 60,000 people watching wheelchair racing, you know, seeing people queuing up, getting tickets, you know, just how many of the sports had thousands of people watching them. It was great. But the other thing was, you know, which I also feel quite strongly about, right? It shifted the dialogue. It helped talk about things in a different way. We started being able to move away from a medical model of disability, but it didn't change the world for disabled people. In 2012, hate crime against disabled people doubled. It's doubled against disabled children. Austerity has made things, I think, quite challenging in terms of how disabled people are treated. And the one thing that I get quite angry about is that a lot of disabled children are now told or asked, are you going to be a Paralympian? Well, that's great if you're good at sport and you want to do it. But what about if you're not, don't have much talent, or you don't want to do it, or you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a lawyer or a teacher? And so I worry that we shut down some opportunities for different disabled people by only thinking of the Paralympics as an option for them. And, you know, I think there's some stuff that we still have to do on that in terms of ensuring disabled children have access to good education and physical activity and all the other things and support that they need. But as the Paralympics, 2012 was amazing. It was, you know, just really huge moments of incredible sport. And, you know, reality is some people have amazing stories and have been through quite dramatic or traumatic episodes to get to the Paralympics, like Martine Wright, who became a double leg amputee in the 7-7 bobbins, you know, the day after we won the Olympics and Paralympics. And then in 2012, she's competing as part of the City volleyball team. I mean, incredible story. Or like me, who had spina bifida and I don't remember being paralysed. I don't have a dramatic or traumatic story to get me to be a Paralympian. And there's something around at the moment which I find really interesting, which is called inspiration porn. And it's usually directed around athletes, which is about how they're all amazing and incredible. And you can kind of safely Google it as a phrase. But about how disabled people are treated. And for me, there's some real challenges around that, around, you know, people who do have some traumatic stories, who may or may not wish to talk about them. But just because you're disabled and do sport, that doesn't make you a hero. And it's a really sort of additional layers of the medical and social model of impairment. I think those are some of the things that we have to challenge. And then amongst all this of, you know, working on the games, you know, I retired, I started doing some work on the games, and then I have a chance to go into the House of Lords. And I'm a crossbencher. There's an interview process. It was the strangest set of interviews I have ever had in my life. One of the questions I was asked was, what's the most interesting debate you've ever listened to in the House of Lords? We do technical. We do really technical, interesting. It may be interesting if that's, you know, something that you care about, but we do stuff that's just line by line legislation. And I think I said in my interview, well, it's all really interesting. And I think when you're there, it can be incredibly interesting, but it's a lot of it's just a slog as well. So anyway, I got through the interview process, and in 2010 I went into the House of Lords. And I remember, you know, it's a really big deal to get through the process. And I remember ringing my dad and saying, Dad, I'm in. Like, they've said yes. And his response was, before you get too excited, make sure they've got the right Tanni Grey-Thompson. Okay, I've got an unusual name, Dad. There is only one Tanni Grey-Thompson. And he's like, yeah, but just you know. And then the next thing he said to me was, well, I always knew that's where you were going to end up. I'm like, really? And he said, well, I told you when you were 21. Don't you remember the conversation? Well, no, I don't. I mean, my dad told me lots of stuff when I was all through my age that I probably didn't listen to him. But that was, I think I vaguely remember the conversation now. I wouldn't bet my mortgage on it. But that was always his view of where I should be trying to get to. And then the other thing my dad said, well, it's still not a proper job, is it? Okay, Dad, but it's pretty close. You know. So my dad was amazing, huge support. But also, you know, potentially my biggest critic, and, you know, a critical friend, and would challenge the things that I was doing. And even though he passed away just after I got there, so he's still a big part of my life in the way that I think, well, do I live up to my dad's expectations of what he thought I could do? And for me, it's never felt like too much, but it's just useful to have that in the back of my mind. You know, what would Dad say about me doing this? So the stuff I work on is welfare reform, legal aid. We're about to do some domestic violence legislation. It's pretty tough, some of it. You go from one piece of legislation to the next. And for me, you know, some of the stuff I've talked about is about learning and understanding about the levers that you can pull to affect change. Some of the stuff I work on, I am not, you know, world-leading expert. What I do is, I'm very lucky. I have a group of people on the outside who help me in lots of ways. And, you know, I think from things I've learned from my sporting career and into politics is how you get that expertise around you, about how you make connections to people, and, you know, not just ring people up when you need them, but have contact and connections with them as much as you can in between those times. Because it's important to, you know, you can't be an expert in everything that you're expected to do in Lords. But where I'm lucky is I know a lot of people who are experts, who I can either sense check my speeches or my comments and say, well, if I do this, what would happen? And that's amazing. And that was, in welfare reform, it was incredible. There was a group of disability rights campaigners who watched every single minute of the welfare reform bill to email me, to send me messages, to say, you know, that was good, this could be better, you need to do this, you need to other. Because sport is great, but it's quite, you know, it's quite personal. I mean, the medals matter, and they, you know, the public loves sport, but the stuff that I do now in Parliament is the decisions we take affect everybody's life, for good or bad. And the challenge with that is people quite like you for the decisions that I take, and there's also people who really don't like me for the decisions that I take. And there's nothing that trains you to deal with that, to be perfectly honest. There's nothing that really trains you to deal with the hate mail or the comments or, you know, some of the posts. But actually, you kind of have to get through. And I think, you know, what I always say to myself is, like, true to myself. I have to stay true to my beliefs and vote the way that I believe. There are some things that I don't vote on. I do try to vote as much as I possibly can, but sometimes if it's something I don't know or understand, I don't vote, because my vote could swing something one way or another. And there are some issues where what you're voting on could be so close in terms of the eventual outcome you know, I don't, but I'd say, you know, I vote on the vast majority of things. We spend a huge amount of time reading. There's like, you know, the glamorous bits, you know, maybe when you change legislation in the chamber, but actually the reality of it is a bit like sport. You spend a lot of time training for a small amount of time competing, or at major games. Spend a lot of time reading briefing papers. One thing I think is important in the House of Lords is people's experience, which is, if we've got this piece of legislation, this is how it will affect this person. So I do kind of say to people, if there's stuff that you care about, and we do a lot of outreach work with schools, and I say this to a lot of young people, you know, write to your MP, write to a peer. I'd say spend a bit of time online to find out if your peer works in that area. You know, don't just randomly write to every peer, because the weird way that we work, we don't have any staff. So when someone writes to me and says, you know, answer my email right now, get a member of your staff to email me, go, it's me. You know, I'm the one that's answering every single email that I get. So, you know, find out what peers are interested in the things that you care about, and write to them, send them information around legislation, tell them how this legislation will affect you. Because for us, that is what works in the chamber. Those personal stories really matter. And they're the ones that can affect change in lots of different ways. So House of Lords Online, never thought we'd do that. In a million years, I never thought we would be voting and debating online. But it's amazing how quickly things can change when we're put in a situation where we need to. So bizarrely, you know, disabled people have been asking for better conditions for working from home and working for flexibly for years and years and years. Kind of doesn't really happen too much. And suddenly, because of the pandemic, everyone can work, well, not everyone, but a lot of people now have the capacity to work from home. So, you know, that there have been many challenges during the pandemic. The blanket do not resuscitate orders have been really difficult. Didn't actually get that much media coverage, which, you know, ends up being, I do worry disabled people just keep getting forgotten about. The Care Act easements, which came in part of legislation that was pushed through really quickly. You know, 362-page piece of legislation was pushed through in a couple of days. And arguably it needed to be, but, you know, the impact of those can be really difficult. So myself and Baroness Campbell of Surbiton, Jane Campbell, are working on trying to make sure that those Care Act easements are switched off as soon as possible. Because local authorities are making really difficult, tough, challenging decisions. But actually, if the attitude around disabled people is that we can just have a DNR order slapped on us just because we're disabled, not because there are any underlying health conditions, it's that constant devaluing of disabled people that I worry about. And also then you look at some of the figures around the pandemic about how much disabled people have been affected. And disabled people, about a quarter of people who've died have been disabled. And you're 11 times more likely to die of COVID than a non-disabled person. So it's those things that, again, don't really get into the media. But if you're disabled, you know that that's out there. And, you know, I'm also doing a lot of work at the moment on wearing masks, not masks, public transport and things like that. So the issues never go away, they just change. And I guess what my strength is, I'm quite resilient to a lot of this. And, you know, I guess my dad would say I'm quite gobby in terms of, you know, just being the person who will keep just going, oh, hang on a minute, you know, what about? I don't think it's right for me, you know, to speak on behalf of lots of different disabled people. I only have my own experience of discrimination, but I know lots of other people's experience of discrimination. And I certainly know that I get far less discrimination than most disabled people, either because I was an athlete, I'm a parliamentarian. The worst discrimination I get is if I'm just seen as another disabled person. So one of the first things that happened when I was pregnant was I was offered termination because people like you shouldn't have children. The response I've developed over many years of thinking quite horrible things in response is, what do you mean Welsh people? So whenever I get, because it always comes with the finger, doesn't it? People like you. And it's always said like, people like you can't do that. Or people like you shouldn't do that. My response is Welsh. And then you wait for the reaction and they go, oh, did you mean because I'm a wheelchair user? Seriously, that's taken about 40 years to develop that one. But, you know, there's some things that, you know, we shouldn't have to use sense of humour, and we shouldn't have to be quiet and compliant and things like that. But actually the reality is sometimes we have to be to affect change. So the thing I've learnt most, I'm going to shut up very shortly, it's about just building those people around. I've got an amazing group of people that when times are difficult and I'm struggling to change legislation, I'm struggling to have my voice heard, and I'm kind of going on and on about things. I've got a group of friends who send me a pot noodle from time to time, or a chocolate biscuit or something like that, who just kind of help G me back up again. And that's really important, because everyone will go through those really tough times, and it's important to have those people around you who'll kind of give you a hug, or metaphorical hug, or who will just say, right, do you know what, stop it, and just sort it out and keep going. And those people are really, really important in my life. I hope the people who do that to me know who you are, because I couldn't do the stuff I do without you. Final thing I'm going to say is one of the big campaigns that I'm working on is better access to public transport for all disabled people. And back in the mid-90s, when the Disability Discrimination Act came out, we were promised that January the 1st, 2020, all trains would be wheelchair accessible. Yeah, we missed that. I was told just before lockdown that I needed to be patient, and I needed to wait another 30 years. Well, do you know what? I might not be around in 30 years, and I'm done with being patient. So what I say to everyone now, that is, I just want the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. And they usually laugh, and then they stop and go, oh, I don't even have the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. I aspire to the same miserable experience of commuting as everyone else. And if you can give me that, I will go away. And until I get that, I'm going nowhere. So that's the thing that keeps me going, because it's, you know what, I don't want to wait another 30 years. You know what, I don't, just stop it, you know. And we kind of all need to fight that change. So yeah, one day I'll be able to get on a train on my own without booking 24 hours in advance and having to beg to get on. And if that happens, then, you know, maybe I will shut up and go away and retire. Until that happens, I'm not going anywhere. So anyway, if you want to get in touch with me about anything, I'm available. I'm on the parliamentary website. You can find me. There's a few different websites that give access, so you can get direct access to us through the House of Lords website. My email address is grey-thompson@parliament.uk. So if you want to get in touch with me, please do. I might not respond very quickly because it is just me answering emails. But yeah, please get in touch if there's anything I can do to help. And I'm going to stop talking there. And thank you very much for listening. And if anybody's got any questions, I'd love to hear from you.
We do have lots of questions.
Okay.
That's a lovely talk, but there's plenty more talking to do, I'm afraid. Okay, I'm going to start with one from Joseph. It says, if you were starting school today, what would be the highest priorities you would focus on that would prepare you for a career and freedom as an adult?
Wow, that's a good one. So we're kind of at a bit of a tricky time in education. My daughter's A-level results are coming out tomorrow. Anyway, so education is important, but it's also formal education and informal education. Learning about the world, learning about how politics works, I think is all really important. I think grades matter to an extent, but also life skills do. And it's quite hard, I think, when you're in school, but it's trying to get as many different skills and opportunities. So work experience is really, meaningful work experience is really difficult to get. But actually, you know, talking to people about their jobs and the skills they've learned, and reason about how other people have got to where they have, I think is quite important. I think the other thing is you never stop learning. At my age, I don't stop learning. You have to just continually keep finding different ways to do things. I think what sport teaches you is there's not one solution. And the thing that you want to be the solution might not be the solution. So you have to find other ways to get there. And you might find the route is, instead of his direct route, is all that. So I think the kind of the winning and losing and the training in sport teaches you to deal with lots of different things. But it's, yeah, I think the other thing is, you know, with technology now, it's easier to connect to people and ask their advice and speak to them. And I think that's really important too. There's a lot of really decent people out there that will talk to you, will give you an hour of time to talk about your aspirations and how you get to places. There's some who aren't. But you know what, don't worry, ignore them. That there will be good people who will offer you advice and help you get to where you want to be.
Thank you. That sort of answers the next question as well, which is, what advice would you give to young disabled people about the road ahead?
Do you know, it's not going to be easy, and there will be lots of discrimination, and there will be people who will look at your impairment and make a very quick judgment about what they think you can or you can't do. You kind of have to build some resilience around dealing with that. And sometimes you'll get really angry. And very occasionally I do lose my temper. Not very often, because it's not pleasant. I tend to shout, I get very snotty, I cry, it's not pleasant, and it doesn't change anyone's attitude. They just go, oh. So, you know, over the years, I've found different ways of dealing with it. The thing that I do struggle with most is not the people talking down to me, or put your money in your purse so you don't lose it, or, oh, isn't it lovely you had a child so she can look after you when you're old? Really? I mean, my daughter's amazing, but, you know, that's really not why I had a child. The stuff I struggle with is when people offer to help me and I say no, but thank you very much for asking. That's really kind of you, because someone else might need it. And then they ignore me. So I've had a few incidents last year where I was pushing through Canary Wharf, had a rucksack on my chair, one on my back, a bag on my knee. I was on the phone, like that, trying to push my chair. And this woman came up and said, do you want a hand? I was like, no, I'm fine, thank you. And she went, you sure? Yeah, I'm sure, I'm fine, thank you. And so it's only because I was just carrying a whole pile of rubbish that I was trying to talk while I'm moving, you know, so literally pushing like that. And so she started pushing me somewhere I didn't want to go. And then I'm very British and go, what do I say? I don't want to upset her. So I kind of let her push me for a bit. And then I pretended I needed to go into this building to get away from her. And then it turned out it was like a reasonably high security building. And I'd said to the security guard, sorry, I'm just trying to get away from that woman because she was a bit freaky. He thought she was kind of more attacking me. And he's like, right, I'll ring the police. And I'm like, no. And I'm still on the phone trying to have this work phone call. And he's going, oh my God. So it's those sorts of things that I find hardest to deal with. So the road's not going to be easy, but find your voice as a disabled person, a voice that you're comfortable expressing, whether that's in with your friends or with other people. Or we need more disabled people to be campaigning. And it's hard when you're fighting for a million different things. But yeah, find your voice and find people around you who will just ignore all the rubbish that you have to deal with. And it will be there, but you know what? Just, you've got to get through it.
You are amazing at predicting the next question, because the next question is, how can disabled people come together and get their voices heard to create change, as it often feels we get lost among the bigger and more politically current issues?
You know, that is really true, that, and it's really hard for disabled people to publicly protest. So I had this conversation with a colleague recently who said to me, well, disabled people should go protest on the streets. And I was like, yeah, but you can only fit one wheelchair use of a bus in London. You know, it'll take us 47 days to get there, you know, and you've got to book 24 hours in advance. There's only two seats on a train, you know, so it's not easy to protest in that way. Also, I think over the years that there've been less groups of disabled people protesting for lots of different reasons. I think social media has made it easier and harder to do that. I think some disabled people might think that because we've got the Equality Act, and this is not based on age actually, but because we've got the Equality Act, we're okay, but the Equality Act is really weak. You know, it's sort of fine, but again, disabled people are at the bottom. And the current chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who's just about to step down, basically said, you know, disabled people have had a bit of a shoddy deal through it. Great. So I think there's lots of different ways, whether it's letter writing, campaigning, social media. For me, social media has been amazing about, you know, people do listen to social media campaigns, train companies do. I mean, the poor person who tweeted about the Greater Anglia train, which was step-free, but not really, who tweeted, you know, when we were actually saying, okay, it's step-free, but can get to the cafe bar, they tweeted, don't worry, you'll be inside of the cafe bar and there will often be staff around to help you. You know, I'm afraid my response to that was, oh my God, this is amazing. In all my years of campaigning, I dreamt of being inside of a cafe bar. I mean, slightly sarcastic. But, you know, actually there's different ways to affect change. I think at some point we need disabled people, you know, peacefully, protesting on the streets in a way that we can to kind of show the voice. But there's loads of different ways to campaign. And it's hard. It took me a while to find the social model and to find my voice and to kind of go, do you know what? It's you, not me. It's society that's inaccessible. It's not my fault. I didn't, ask for my impairment. I've got it and I can't change it. But it's finding, and there's some amazing books around Mike Oliver, Jane Campbell, different people, listen to Liz Carr, the actress. I mean, she does some amazing campaigning work. Find other disabled people to find where you fit in with that kind of campaigning side. If it's your thing. If it's not your thing, there's no responsibility for you to do it. But if you want to be involved, there's loads of different ways that you can learn about the movement and you can learn about how to help.
Okay, we have a question from Jessica. Jessica says, I'm a wheelchair user, age 44, so grew up at the same time as you. No toilets, sitting in the guard's carriage on a train. Yeah. Couldn't use buses, nowhere accessible. I've just joined a local committee to improve accessibility, to make it more obvious. If places haven't got access, they should say they haven't got it instead of scrolling down for information. Do you think that's something you should, or the disabled world should be trying to persuade people, say, actually, no, I can't cater for disabled?
Yeah, I mean, there are buildings which are older and there are buildings which are hard to adapt, and there's also buildings which people can't be bothered to. And Lord Blencathra tried to bring in some legislation, which was 6-inch rule bill, which if a shop had a step which was 6 inches, they had to make it accessible, step free. And there's loads of people who use excuses like it's too expensive or they think it's too much, or, I mean, I went out yesterday and wanted to go into to get a takeaway drink, and there's a big step. And so eventually attracted someone's attention. They came out and said, we've got a ramp. And it's like, yeah, but to get your attention, I had to sit outside going, hello, hello, stick a bell by, or put a little card with your number, the mobile number of the manager in charge, so I can ring and say I'm outside. Can I get a drink? There's lots of ways around it. But yeah, it's really hard. And then also the definition of accessible is quite different, even within the UK, let alone if you go anywhere else. I remember going to Germany a few years ago and they said they had an accessible, and I don't really need an accessible room, but I asked for one and it was brilliant. The accessible room was the most amazing accessible room I've ever seen. And the hotel was in a building that was up 10 steps. I had to crawl up the steps to the outside of the building to get in the building. Not really. So a better definition of accessibility, I think, would be really good. But also, yeah, I think businesses should have to, and I think they should have to be much more explicit. You shouldn't have to, have to search around or ring to find if you can get in. Yeah, I think they should be better. And do you know what? If I see another accessible toilet which is used as a store cupboard, I now just say, stop it. It's not good enough anymore. And it's only when you talk to some non-disabled people, say about trains where there's no toilets on a train, and so do you realise, that I might have to be on a 5-hour train journey and I can't go to the toilet and I can't drink and I have to dehydrate myself. And people just are shocked. So I think talking about your experience is good, because I think, again, a lot of non-disabled people just think it's okay, that it's not that bad. And there's a lot that's not that bad, but there's a lot that's not great. And I'm tired of being grateful. I think that happened when I turned 50. It's like, I'm tired of just having to go, oh, thank you for letting me in. I don't spend money in places that I can't get in anymore. I just don't do it, and, we have to find different ways to affect change, but it's good for business. The purple pound is huge. And so disabled people need to think about where they spend money. And if it's places that are not good, don't do it.
Again, I think you pretty much answered this question, and I think it's a really positive thing. It says, how much do you feel COVID-19 could positively impact flexibility with employment for the disabled? But I know that what you were saying is that it shows employers that people who have difficulty accessing work and transport can work from home equally well as their able-bodied colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been amazing in that way that, the disability employment gap is twice the national average. It's hard as a disabled person to get into work, but disabled people who are in work are very loyal, work really hard. But again, there's not the understanding of travel time. Before lockdown, I was traveling on the tube at busy time, and somebody said to me, you should travel when it's more quiet because there's people who've got important jobs to go to. I'm going to work. You've got a job? Yeah. Where do you work? Westminster. Oh, that's lovely. What do you do? I'm a peer. Oh, and it's that sort of patronising stuff. So, you know, so I do try and travel when it's quieter, but it all adds to my day. And, you know, to live in London near an accessible tube station is really expensive. Or to find a flat that is wheelchair accessible is even more expensive. So, you know, disabled people, you know, a journey that might take a non-disabled person half an hour could take a disabled person 2 hours. So, you know, a better use of your time has been to, you know, to work in a different way. What's been really interesting, a lot of my mates who commute, who thought nothing of commuting 4 hours a day in London, are now saying, why are we doing this? We don't need to do it. So I think the whole world of work is going to change. The bit I worry about is disabled people who, because they're shielding or because they're worried about other people being stupid, are reluctant to return to work in an office or to in their normal space. I don't want them forgotten, and I don't want them to miss out on promotion and opportunities because they're not physically present. But seriously, if the House of Lords, whose rules haven't changed that much in 400 years, can go online in 2 weeks, then you know what, anything can change. I mean, that's where I'm eternally optimistic. So, you know, we have to keep making sure if we've got disabled colleagues that they're not forgotten within the new, whatever the new world is going to be, and we don't know, but they're not forgotten in this new world of work.
The next question really talks about something that you were saying about how to campaign. This is, my local shopping centre does not have a changing places toilet. However, my understanding is there is new legislation meaning places such as shopping centres must have them. Is this the case? And if so, how can I get it enforced?
Now, I read something about that a couple of months ago, about there going to be more changing places. I can't remember. I hadn't thought that had gone through legislation. But if you want to email me at my Grey-Thompson@parliament.uk email address, I will find that out. I certainly think there was a promise to have more changing places, but it's really important. You know, letter writing is still, you know, it still has an impact. Local news, you know, local radio, local newspapers are, you know, desperate for stories. So getting in touch in that way. It's a real fine balance between, and I struggle with this, having a picture of a sad disabled child, you know, gets people being emotive, but I really struggle with it because it then sort of feeds into disabled people can't do anything. But I think there are ways around to have really kind of positive local campaigns that don't involve somebody looking sad. But I think it's about getting the story across that, you know, a changing places toilet makes this amazing difference, but if you don't have it, you can't do anything. I think you can get those stories across in the local press. And at the moment, you know, a lot of the shopping centres are really, really struggling, and they need people in to spend money. So linking it to an economic, to the value of the purple pound, or, you know, getting a campaign to say we're not going to, you know, none of our friends and family will shop here unless we have an accessible toilet, then, you know, that's important. And again, it comes back to what's access. A lot of people may not know what a changing places toilet is, and don't realise that they think an accessible toilet is an accessible toilet. Well, we all know it's not. So, yeah, I think a local campaign can be really effective. Write to your MP. Your MP might not be able to do much, but get them involved as well. Get school children writing. School children writing is always a good one as well. School children writing to the MP. That can be effective.
Okay, just a comment here. I never book 24 hours in advance. I just tell them that I just turn up and tell them that I'm here, because why shouldn't I do exactly the same as able-bodied people?
Quite right too. So I'm a mix between booking and not booking. I really resent having to book. And it's sometimes, there was one time it took me 47 minutes to book one train journey. The thing that really bugs me on social media is if there is an assistance fail, and I say this to every train company, the social media team's first question is usually, did you book? Like, no, it doesn't matter whether you booked. If you are on a train, you're on a train and you need to get off. So I would love turn up and go to be just, that is it. And there's a lot of people in train companies and Network Rail who really, really support that. where I have been a bit worried with COVID is whether they were going to dial back on turn up and go, and try and stop people travelling as turn up and go. So maybe one of the things that has made non-disabled people realise our experience is they have to book train seats now, which they didn't have to because you jump on a train. So rather than raising the bar where we're closer to non-disabled people, their bar's coming down to us. But I really don't feel that, you know, on a commuter service that you should have to book 24 hours, or at least, you know, make it easier. I'm sick to death of the forms where every time you have to fill out what you want, that you can't just sign in. But I go for it. Just, we shouldn't have to book. Not anymore.
We have a question that says, I know the medical model of disability, but not much about the social model. Could you explain it a bit more, please?
Yeah, sure. So the social model basically says that people are, so I use handicapped in a very specific way. People aren't handicapped by their impairments. They're handicapped by the society they live in. So the thing that stops me being integrated in society is not having is having steps, not having a ramp, or not having a toilet, or not being able to get in through the front door of a building. So it's society and the infrastructure of society that is to blame for disabled people not being able to have a full and integrated sort of life. And so it's interesting, the social model's evolving, because even if everything was step free and there were changing places, toilets everywhere, there would still be a number of challenges. But it's also around attitude to disabled people. And through welfare reform bill and different bits of legislation, we do slip into medical model, you know, or not through lack of sort of trying to fight against it. But, you know, around COVID, there's been a lot of medical model, you know, talking about your impairment and so what's wrong with you and stuff like that. And I just don't think that that's really possible. But if you take it from a different point of view, that the disabled person's not to blame, it's the infrastructure of society, that puts quite a different focus on bringing about change. So I'm not sure that answered. Jane Campbell and Mike Oliver wrote some really good work on this, which is worth looking at. And a book which to be honest, I haven't started reading yet. Sorry, I haven't got my glasses on. But it's been recommended to me as being really good to read, is a book by Leonard J. Davis, Enforcing Normalcy, Disability, Deafness and the Body. It's interesting because they use people with disability where I much prefer to use disabled people, and that's the language of the Equality Act. But it talks about ableism, which is, you know, the form of, you know, attacking disabled people, sort of poor attitudes is ableism. And so, yeah, that's on my reading list for this weekend. So it'd be worth having a look at that as well, which I think is quite interesting. Let me just read what it says. Insistent disability can be added to the familiar triad of race, class and gender. The book challenges progressives to expand the limits of their thinking about human oppression. The reality is disabled people are quite, by and large, oppressed. You know, we need to kind of sort of talk about that a little bit more.
Again, you have sort of preempted my next question. I often feel that when I voice an issue, it gets brushed off because of my disability, like they don't take me seriously because I'm disabled. What can I do when this happens? Yeah,
so absolutely. I get that quite a lot. It depends in what context it is. So if it's in terms of a workplace, I think it's finding people around that can help and support you. I struggle a bit with the word ally. I don't know whether I like it or I don't like it. But some of the things where that's happened to me, when I've been in meetings, I've talked about it with other people outside and explained why I feel that way. And it takes time and effort. And it's sometimes having other people to not speak for you or on behalf of you, but to back you up in a meeting and to say, yeah, what she said. Because that happens, you know, it happens to a woman as well. You know, I've been in stuff where I've said something and they've gone, oh, that's lovely. Yes, marvellous. And then a man said it and they all go, oh, yes, marvellous idea, brilliant. So for that, I basically found one of the guys in the room to say, yeah, Tanni said that. So there's lots of different ways to do it. If it's in a medical setting, that can be harder to deal with in terms of, you know, if it's during a medical procedure or things like that, that can be harder to deal with. For me, what works best is trying to stay really calm and just say, you know, no. this is how I feel, this is what I want to do, this is, you know, this is my considered opinion. The other thing which is really useful is practicing lots of things. So I do it less now because I've spent a lot of time practicing some of this stuff, is writing down the things that you would say and thinking about how you would have those conversations, how those difficult conversations pan out. And commit, because when you're trying to, I only think of the witty amusing put down about 3 hours later when I've thought of it. And in situations which are stressful, it's really difficult to suddenly think of those things. So I try and rehearse the sentences that I might say or how to react to certain situations. And you shouldn't, the problem is you shouldn't have to have someone else backing you up. But the reality is there's lots of different ways that you can make it happen. But I do think, you know, as disabled people, I was in a meeting recently where exactly that happened, where my view of discrimination as a disabled person was completely ignored. And I just very calmly came back and said, no, I would like to carry on discussing this, and I would like to revisit what we've talked about. And, you know, I would like you to understand what my experience is. And then we kind of get there. But it's exhausting as well. It really is. And so I'm not going to pretend that it's not exhausting and that it's dead easy to fix, because it's not. But you have to just keep trying to have a go. But for me, rehearsing the stuff, the answers in my head is the most effective way that I've found to get people to listen to me.
Do you think internalized ableism can be an issue?
Yes, absolutely. And people don't even realise that they're doing it. You know, the person who said to me on the tube, travel when it's quieter, I think they thought they were being really helpful and kind and lovely and trying to help me. But it's like, no, you've been ableist. As if I can't decide what time I travel on the tube. So yeah, it is. Because that's, you know, if we look across society, where are disabled people? So we've got Paralympians, lovely. It's once every 2 years, summer and winter. We don't have that many disabled people in the House of Commons. We've got more disabled people in the Lords, but we don't have the same media profile. Where are disabled people in terms of leadership? Where are they in terms of film and TV? You know, so Liz Carr, amazing. And you know, I can name a few other actors who've been on programs like EastEnders or, you know, Emmerdale or things like that. But cripping up, which is the other thing I get on my soapbox about, where non-disabled actors pretend to be disabled, there's a joke that if you crip up, you know, you'll get an Oscar. And that is just totally accepted in the film world. And you know what, there are ways around. So if any of you have watched Kingsman, the first one, where one of the lead sort of female characters, the baddie, is meant to be a double leg amputee, she's a non-disabled actress. How much money do they spend CGI-ing her legs to put prosthetic blades on versus employing an actress who was a double leg amputee? I did get into a bit of a Twitter discussion with whoever runs Dwayne Johnson's Twitter feed, because he tweeted something, and I might not have this right, about, you know, in his latest film Skyscraper, where he played a character who was a leg amputee. I mean, his films aren't real, let's be honest about this, but he was like 120 foot up in the air with a rope tangled around his prosthetic leg, which his leg would have fallen off, and, you know, he survived. So I'm not saying, you know, none of his films are very real, and, you know, you take it, but some of the thing that was coming from the Twitter feed was saying how he hopes that it would progress, you know, amputee actors. And my response was, well, employ an amputee actor. You know, don't play the amputee character. Have someone in your film who is an amputee. But it's that cripping up stuff that's like, it's totally accepted. Blacking up is quite wrongly, you know, it's totally wrong. It's not acceptable on any stretch of the imagination. And we should feel that strongly about cripping up. And, you know, where they say, oh, well, it's a film about Stephen Hawking, you know, and it's a really, you know, I watched it, it's a really good film. Oh, well, you need the same actor because he had to walk and then he had to not walk. Well, really? Do you really? You know, let's just be a bit better about this. One of my favourite things, and I'll shut up very quickly, Ricky Gervais in The Office, where Julie Fernandez plays the character in there. She's a wheelchair user, and there's a fire alarm and they leave her on the staircase because she's too difficult to carry down the stairs. Most wheelchair users I know, that has happened to them. And non-disabled people go, oh, well, that's dreadful. No, that's happened to us. That is not you know, a comedy play. That is real life. So some of the stuff he does is quite smart in terms of challenging those things. So yeah, where I just said we don't have enough disabled people who are leaders to see where to go, and that has to change as well. Yeah. So I'll stop ranting on about films, but they could do better. They could really do better.
Of course, that's very true. Another question, do you think disabled people should be coming together to demonstrate that those things that are inconveniencing the general public and the world at large during COVID-19 are the same things that inconvenience people with disabilities the whole time?
Yes. And that's about kind of finding your voice, and whether that's, I mean, social media is not always a terribly pleasant place to be at the minute, and there's quite a lot of trolling either for women or disabled people, but yeah, it's just a lot of disabled people just don't realise. So I sat on a meeting recently which was all about diversity and inclusion. One of the people who's worked in this space for a number of years said, I just had no idea the discrimination disabled people faced. Like, you work in D&I, you should, you know, you might not have experienced it, but because of your background you will have experienced other things, but come on. So that's where I'm getting less patience around those things. So yeah, you know, it's interesting how non-disabled people just don't realise. So yeah, so write a book, write a blog, talk to your paper, you know, yeah, tell people about this is what life is really like.
The final question is actually mine, and I'm going to be big and brave about your answer because we need the truth. Do you think over the years that you have been dealing with medical professionals that their attitudes have changed?
I have had some amazing medical professionals, absolutely amazing ones, who were just incredible. So when I needed a metal rod put on my spine, you know, I started going to visit David Jenkins. He sadly passed away now when I was about 9, and he spoke to me, not my parents, you know, and that was amazing. And he talked me through, and he kept saying to me, you know, if this is happening to you, it's not happening to your mum and dad, you need to understand at the point that we need to operate, you have to. It was incredible. He spent time talking to me and listening to me and stuff like that. I've probably only had 1 or 2 experiences which haven't been great. And to be fair, both times I just walked out of the hospital and changed doctors and just said, you are not delivering my baby. So one of those was a question around how, with my scoliosis and my level of impairment, because I'm about a T6 paraplegic, how I was going to have an epidural needle stuck in my spine, because you don't really know where my spine, I've had an MRI, it's a big mushy mass, and you actually have no idea which bit of my spine you're sticking in. And this medical professional said, oh, well, we delivered that baby last year to that woman who was in a wheelchair, so you'll be fine. So I said, what was her impairment? I said, oh, she broke her foot.
Oh, God.
You are not delivering my baby. But yeah, so that takes a bit of a nerve. But I'd have to say most of the time it's pretty good. But it's about talking to people. And you know what? On the other side, you know, being a medic, I couldn't do it. I couldn't deal with the people, the cases, the bad news, the good news. I just couldn't do it. And so there's almost like you have to sort of be able to step back and have a moment where you can kind of dial down compassion to kind of just deal with some of the stuff you deal with. But actually the important thing to remember is they're always people. And so, you know, I'm kind of, I think I've been lucky, but yeah, just don't treat people as people. And yeah, it's not easy, but I'm really lucky. I just, if I don't click with a medical professional, I go and find another one, because it's my life. So, you know, I go and find people that I relate to. I'm sure somewhere in my notes, I got stopped from reading my notes a little while ago. I'm sure there is something that was written in there back in the days when actually doctors could actually write proper stuff in the notes that says she's really awkward and difficult. I am sure that's in there. But hey, being a difficult woman's not a bad thing.
No, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, it's been the most fascinating hour. I'm sure you have motivated and made a lot of people listening very positive, much more confident about fighting for their rights, their disabilities, and getting the world to accept that disabled people have every right as much as able, have every possibility as much as able people to lead really productive, funny, and wonderful lives. Thank you so much indeed. I just want to remind everybody that the next webinar is at 7 p.m. on Friday. It's Dr. Maria Dimitriadi, who's going to be talking about what we can learn from worms about SMA. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Good luck to your daughter.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.